Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about organizing, faith-based organizing and otherwise. Lucky enough to be joined today by Rudy Lopez from Interfaith Worker Justice, and by Traci, is it Wile?
It is.
Wile from Organizing for Action. To both of them for being here tonight. And I know you guys, this is the first time you've both seen the film?
The first time I've seen it.
Yes?
I saw it last week.
Oh, okay. So I guess I'll open with a question for both of you to reflect a little bit on the film. And then we can talk for a couple minutes and then maybe open it up for questions from the audience. Obviously, the film is about, I'm going to move back so I can see you both. The film is about organizing. It's about three organizers, three very different kinds of organizers. Simone, who is a policy person who is organizing writ large on policies that face the entire American society. Chris, who is obviously working for women's issues and is really an advocate for church reform, and she's a reformer as opposed to a policy person. And Gene, who is in the trenches, doing the face-to-face, the one-on-one work, person to person. You both come from very different backgrounds in organizing. I'm wondering who you connect with, and why, or if you maybe have thoughts on two of them, but about how they organize and how it connects to your work and your views on what it means to organize. You want to go first?
Sure. So let me just give a little bit of background. If anyone's not familiar with Organizing for Action, we are a nonprofit issue advocacy organization based here in Chicago. We grew out of the campaign and we organize on a number of issues across the board that the president advocated for and was elected for, including the Affordable Care Act, including women's rights, climate change, a whole number of things, economic opportunity, which includes minimum wage, a rate, a living wage, as well as student loan reform, and a number of things. So I think that what's really fascinating about this is that I think certainly because we sort of address all of these issues at the national, federal, and local levels, I think that all of them are really important in the whole scale of the type of issue organizing that we do. And so I have kind of an affinity for all of them. I think probably more for Sister Jean. Personally, I think for Sister Chris, because it's all about the women, and women should be treated equally in the church as well as in any institution or discipline that they work in. And so I think that all of them, though, are very, very important because you need all aspects of that to be able to organize at all scales. And, the people in the trenches are the ones who are connecting with people so closely that it's just so important, as Sister Simone said, to make that connection. But you also need the visibility to raise the issue up. And so you need people like Sister Simone who can go out and engage these larger audiences and form coalitions with different partnerships to be able to have those kinds of conversations. So I think that it's all of them. And I think that it was, I'm sure very intentional on your part to be able to show us those three different types of viewpoints in this film. And I think that that's what makes it really powerful.
Thank you. How about for you?
Again, my name is Rudy Lopez. I'm the Executive Director for Interfaith Worker Justice. And just a quick piece about who we are and what we do. We're a national network of faith and labor groups and also worker centers throughout the country. There's over 62 affiliates to our organization. And we promote positive change with workers for their conditions that they work in, through increased pay, through better working conditions, but more than anything, touching on the way in which workers are viewed and the value of the work that they produce. And this film really touched me in a lot of different ways, and I'm going to also go with the similar answer that all three were really impactful because they each brought an important aspect of the way change needs to happen. It needs to happen one-on-one. It needs to be a big push and create space for people to think differently, as the radical part does. And also, we need strong policy. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to have policy that reflects our values. And the thing that was so impactful to me is there was this real struggle happening between what they believed was right and the values of what the institution, at least what the rules of the institution that they've dedicated their life to, was saying were the true values. But there was something in each one of these people, in each one of these women, that was speaking very loudly. This sort of North Star that was guiding them. And their dedication to that was really inspiring.
You know, Rebecca often talks about social justice as a spiritual practice. And that was something that really drew her to this story and to make this film. She's not Catholic. She's agnostic, a seeker. And certainly for me, I think being over the last years, including working on this project, it put me much more in touch with the work that I do as a filmmaker, as that social justice work. Do you have any thoughts about that idea, as you know, what it means to organize for justice as a spiritual practice? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I would say I would probably align myself very much with Rebecca. I am not necessarily a religious person. I would qualify myself as a spiritual person, as a seeker, perhaps, as you say. But I think that organizing work tends to be a very passionate and committed type of work. And I think that it's very fair to say that becomes a spiritual work, because you can't look at that arc of this long-term type of work and not be committed to it. It is about really seeing the longer view. You can't jump in and say, oh, I'm going to work for the ACA, and then if something doesn't happen in 6 months and then just walk away, then obviously that took years in the making, to watch the sisters go through what they went through, and then finally to see, and Sister Gene unfortunately didn't get to see that the censure was lifted. I mean, that was decades. And so you have to be in it, because it's not about the victory. Of course, the victory is fantastic, but it's about being the voice in that process, because if the voices aren't there, then nothing's going to change. And that's how you make change happen. That's what civic engagement looks like, on a very spiritual way. But that is what civic engagement is, and this is what they're doing on a daily basis, and that's what organizers do every single day.
And obviously, Rudy, you come from your organization comes from a faith background. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, we're an interfaith, so we deal with all different faith backgrounds and views on faith. I'm personally Catholic, and I was able to connect with many of the themes there, and also with a lot of the struggles that they dealt with. And also very much with the way in which they see this as their vocation. I mean, the reason why I came to IWJ, Interfaith Worker Justice, is because it is a vocation. It's a call to fulfill the purpose that is connected to why God put us on this earth. I mean, each one of the women profiled there was very clearly driven by something very, very powerful, and that's something that's deeply embedded into each one of us. The idea, and unlike the way it's called radical grace, which, the root of the word radical is root. It's coming from something deeply embedded, and the fact that they were expressing that in such a beautiful and powerful way, it's really living out in the Christian tradition, the gospel. It's taking the gospel and living it in a real way. And to me, that's really an amazingly powerful gift that people can give through their own vocation.
Yeah, thank you both. Why don't we open it up for a couple minutes for questions from the audience about this topic or about the film? Yeah, way up in the back. No, Well, unfortunately, Rebecca couldn't be here tonight. I know she was supposed to be, but she fell. I don't know if it was off of this step. C- oh, okay. Had call to action and fractured her foot, so that's why she wasn't able to join us tonight. Um, Rebecca was com- introduced to Gene actually first, and as she would say, I'll try and remember, how she describes it. Her experience of nuns was Sister Act, pretty much. That's what she, for me, it would have been the Flying Nun. That tells us which generation. But that was her view on nuns, and she was actually thinking about this idea of spiritual justice work as spiritual practice, and thinking about how people sustain themselves. And somebody introduced her to Sister Jean, who by then was already in her 80s or late 70s for sure. And Jean totally blew her stereotypes, all of her stereotypes, completely blew them up. And she became fascinated with the sisters and started interviewing, and she interviewed tens of sisters across the country. One would say, "Well, I don't really feel comfortable getting on camera because obviously the church is very hierarchical, as you saw, and some people in the church even would compare it to the military. People don't want to step out of line. It's dangerous to do that, and so." Even the women, though, who said, "I don't want to talk on camera," said, "But you should talk to, Sister X or Sister Y." And through that process, she met, as I said, tens of nuns, and filmed with a couple of them here, a couple of them there. But really, like you said, these three have such an incredible balance, and their stories took them to such interesting places, and they were sort of the perfect candidates and subjects, in that they both represented different parts of a story that could weave together to a larger whole, and also that they were so open, and that they were willing to take that risk, especially in the time. I think that she began her research just before the censure. The censure went on for a long time, though. So if you think about the film, I believe that the first dates in the film are 2010 or 9. Thank you. So it went on for a long time, and they were so open to being followed for a long period of time and opening themselves up to our process. So very fortunate in that. Yes. Yeah. A censure is, I'm not a theologian in this case. A censure in legal terms means, to be censured means to be called out, so to speak. Is that maybe somebody else knows a better definition of what a censure is?
Reprimanded.
Reprimanded. Thank you. And in the Catholic Church, there are different levels of sort of being called out or being reprimanded, from a censure. Well, censure is not the lowest, but all the way through being excommunicated or being, in their case, released of their vows, is how nuns would say, defrocked. If you're a,
It was a formal reprimand.
it's no, it's a legal, it's a canon. There's a whole legal system within the church, canon law, and it's a step in that direction. It would be the equivalent of getting a fine or being held in contempt, something to that effect in civil court. So if you don't fall into line, if you don't do sort of what the censure is there to do, then you can move up the ladder in terms of the kinds of punishment that you would get. Just like if you were in contempt of court and you refused to do what the judge had ordered you to do, you could end up in jail. I hope that was, again, I'm not a canon lawyer, but yes.
So where's this movie gonna go from here?
What a perfect question. The film has been doing a run in festivals. It is going to tonight is our last night at the Siskel Center. It's been a great run here. We're hoping that based on the success of the run here, we'll be able to do some theatrical runs, limited theatrical runs across the country. And we are talking with a U.S. broadcaster for a television broadcast in the summer. Can't say who it is yet because it's not finalized. But we feel that we're really committed that this film get out to anybody and everybody. We feel that the power of this film is in the community engagement campaign, and both Interchange Productions and Kindling Group. Kindling Group is a nonprofit that has a double mission, which is creating compelling films, but also transforming them into tools for social change. So the idea is that we want there to be as many community screenings, and we're partnering with a lot of organizations to do community screenings across the country, both religious and non-religious, religious feminist organizations and mainstream feminist organizations, across the spectrum, of organizations to partner to get the film out into those community settings, and also using the film to create a conversation around church reform, around leadership, and around that idea of activism as a spiritual practice. Those are sort of the goals of the campaign. You can go to radicalgracefilm.org and get all sorts of information. Laura Wilson is standing on the side there. She's one of the chief architects of our engagement campaign. If anybody's interested in talking about hosting a screening or has an organization they think might be interested. And I don't know if we have our little text to thing. Do we have our text to thing? No? We do. You can, outside as you're walking out, Laura will put up a little sign where you can text on your phone to a number and automatically sign up for our mailing list and get information about spreading the word. We've built a really strong online social media community around the film, and we continue to do so. So we welcome your joining that for sure. Yes.
I had a question. I know Nuns on the Bus has come to Chicago a couple of times. So, what, if any, did your organizations have any role? Did you go? Did you sign the bus when it last came through? Anything like that?
Yeah, I know Rebecca and
Also asking the panelists.
oh yeah, I'll just tell from our perspective that they've done a number. This was the first Nuns on the Bus, and they've done on immigration reform. I think they've done it on fair wages, right?
They just did one with the Pope's visit.
Right, and another one with the Pope's visit. So go ahead if either one of you have had.
So I happen to be on the board of Network. So in some ways, I'm Simone's boss, although she wouldn't see it that way. I was just with her a few weeks ago at a board meeting. And they see the power of going out, and in some ways it's sort of like an evangelization, right? Going amongst the people with a policy position, going face to face. They also see that they can't just do a bus tour every year. So they're finding the ways in which they can balance that. But Network, it's interesting, this censure, which was supposed to bring the smackdown, actually took Network to another level. It really propelled them forward, not just their profile, but in terms of membership, influence. When Network calls somebody on the Hill, they pick up the phone. And this had a lot to do with it. So it was one of those situations where something that could have been very bad for them, it speaks to their courage and really stepping into it. This was supposed to make them sort of cower back, but they really stepped into it with a lot of courage and a lot of faith, which really helped them grow exponentially.
So Organizing for Action doesn't have an official relationship with Nuns on the Bus. Our previous executive director, John Carson, knows Rebecca and Sister Simone, and has, sort of attended events and had conversations with them. But the documentary was a little more focused on electoral work that they were doing. And Organizing for Action cannot participate in any electoral work. However, Radical Grace is an entirely different situation. And I would just like to piggyback a little bit on what Danny was saying earlier, that these are amazing tools, documentary films, especially around social impact issues that Organizing for Action works on, are incredible tools for us and our headquarters organization, as well as for our 250 chapters across the country, to be able to start conversations and have build coalitions and partnerships with really amazing groups that come together for that intersection to talk about and try to find solutions for a particular issue. And because they touch on so many, I hope that we can talk about potentially doing some community engagement work, because they, talking about women's issues, talking about healthcare and access to healthcare for women and families is so important, and it's still fights that were happening all across the country. And also, we're in the new enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act. That is not done. There's still so much work to do to get people enrolled, and I think continuing all those conversations. And a film like this brings a lot of those issues together in a way that can bring new folks into our chapters and have them get engaged. Again, this is about sort of civic engagement, and this is a really amazing and great way to get those conversations going. So thanks, Danny, for doing it. Pass that on to Rebecca.
Let's talk. No, we can. Perfect. Other questions? Yes, last one.
Kind of a little bit. And by the way, thank you so much for the film and for staying after and talking with us. But November 2015, what's something all three of you could? What's a concern you have going forward, America 2015, and what's something that's been a source of good news for you or your organizations in the last couple of months?
On any, in general, on anything, any? Wow.
I know, that's big.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That is a big one. Well, so, I mean, I think that there has been, a few things that we're looking forward to. Again, we have to pivot a little bit as the election cycle comes into play. But again, what happens is we can have conversations around these kinds of issues, which is really fantastic. And so I think that, we're looking for, there's a lot of momentum right now around gun violence prevention and really starting to get some conversations happening at the local level. Things are not really moving at the federal level, so we're going to be moving towards the local level. Again, the enrollment period for the Affordable Care Act, and so we're looking to really have big numbers again this enrollment period. And next year being a new year and the end of the president's term is very interesting for us, in a very interesting position. But we're really looking forward to the things that he's going to be moving into, because he's certainly not going down quietly. And so taking cues from his administration and kind of moving forward in that way. I guess, some big things, climate, I think, is a very big one. I'm talking about a lot of issues right now, sorry. But you asked. So as we move into the Paris talks happening in December, that is a very big thing. And the fact that people are talking about that as a top line issue is huge. And I think that a lot of the work that our volunteers have done in the last several years have really contributed to some of that, along with many, many, many climate partners, which has been a really exciting move. I'm sure there's many other things, but I'm going to let Rudy take over now.
So it's a great question because there's so much on both sides. I mean, we're living in very challenging times. In the work that we do, we see every day how worker rights are under assault. We see how workers go to work and not sure if they're going to come back because they're working in dangerous conditions. We see families being torn apart by a broken immigration system. So we see many things that make us worry. There's a court decision that's going to be looked at by the Supreme Court next year called Friedrichs versus the California Teachers Association, which could go a long way to undoing labor rights and changing the way we look at labor unions. So there's a lot to be vigilant on, a lot to work toward. At the same time, there's a lot to be hopeful for. We have amazing movements. I mean, just the other day, we had amazing actions all over the country around the Fight for 15. Fast food workers standing up, not just for $15 an hour, but what does it represent? It represents work that should be respected, and there should be dignity with that. No matter whether you're flipping burgers or picking fruit and vegetables, or whether you're working in a hotel, these are jobs that deserve respect and dignity. So I'm encouraged by the way in which everyday people who are working in these positions are taking courage and taking a stand and making a difference. You know, we just had the Pope come here a couple of months ago, and what he did, I think, was able to put people's focus, even if it was for a short time, on a set of not doctrine or laws, but a set of values and ideas. And that momentum, I think, from his visit, we hope that can carry over this idea of openness and not being so stuck into the letter of the law, but the spirit of what it really means. And in 2016, we've got this important election that's going to take place, which is a battle of ideas, right? People like to say it's a battle of ideas and ideology. It's actually a battle for people's lives, because these policies have real consequences. So I find myself in both being very challenged, but also very encouraged. And I think it's a call for each one of us to find our space and our own call to stand up and do what we can with the gifts that God has given us, because we each been given something very powerful. And I think now more than ever, we're called to put that into action.
Yeah. Embrace your inner radical, as we say at the end of our film. So thank you all very much for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. And we'll be out in the lobby.